Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. The story of a 29-year-old Oregon woman who took her life following a terminal diagnosis garnered international headlines. Now, some say Brittany Maynard's suicide has reframed the right to die debate and given euthanasia advocates new momentum. The Vatican this week called her suicide a tragic symbol of the culture of death. Here to discuss the story and give us his perspective as a neuroscientist, a priest, and an ethicist, please welcome back to the program the Director of Education of the National Catholic Bioethics Center, Father TAD PACHOLCZYK. Father TAD, welcome back.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Now, does this reframe this right to die debate, in your opinion,
well,
seeing a young person die?
I think it does. I think it appeals to people in the younger crowd. It makes it an issue of relevance to them because so often they push death at a distance and don't want to get into it too much. You know, this was trending really big on places like Facebook, and so I think it has garnered a lot of attention among a crowd that normally wouldn't pay much attention.
I want to play a little bite here because just to acquaint people with the stakes, there are right to die initiatives, laws now moving forward in New Jersey, Wyoming, Connecticut, and other states. But they're actually moving through the legislatures now. I want to play you this bite. This is Brittany Maynard talking to CBS's Jan Crawford.
So to the people who would say, well, you're choosing to end your life, that's suicide, you would say, no, it's what?
No, cancer is ending my life. I am choosing to end it a little sooner and in a lot less pain and suffering.
That argument appeals to an awful lot of people. Cancer is ending her life, she said.
Well, it does appeal to people, but the question is whether what she's saying is true. It's clear that she is taking initiative on her own to bring her life to a close, and to say that that's not suicide, to suggest that it is really the cancer that's taking her when she's actively intervening by swallowing barbiturates, it simply doesn't stand the test of accuracy here.
She makes the other point, and I've been reading a lot of commentary on this case, and they all, to a person, chaplains and ethicists, they all say, look, she's sparing her family suffering. She said that elsewhere, that this is to spare her family a prolonged death.
Well, and certainly the intention is understandable, is good. Nobody likes to see a family member suffer. And there's, you know, an element of generosity perhaps written into what she's trying to do, but the question of how she's going about it, and really whether she's going to actually achieve the end here. Because you remember Victoria Kennedy, she wrote an editorial about Ted Kennedy's cancer, which it turns out was the same kind of cancer that Brittany had. And she said, you know, they diagnosed him as having 2 to 4 months left. We got 15 months of wonderful time with him. So you think, you know, Brittany, if she hadn't done that, how much time, how much blessing could she have brought to her family? She's saying she wanted to spare them suffering. Well, that's understandable. But I think some great graces here were short-circuited and many opportunities lost.
There's also no talk of palliative care, as if people are just left to suffer from cancer and, you know, we'll watch them ravaged and they're just going to be screaming out in pain. There is palliative care.
There is palliative care, and I think that her physicians really didn't do her much of a service by painting her time as being so short, 6 months, and painting a death for her that really frightened her. I think she was driven by fear here a great deal, and the palliative care side was not shared with her. Palliative care these days is getting better and better all the time.
And this is the pain relief.
Pain relief, pain management, and also, you know, addressing symptoms in general that arise as people die.
I want to raise a few issues. The Washington Post, in an editorial, said she died in a philosophically responsible way. She spared her family a drawn-out death. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think the issue here, you know, philosophically responsible. Is it philosophically responsible for us to treat something good, like the gift of our life, as if it were an evil to be extinguished? It's not. Philosophically,
the throwaway culture the book talks about. This
right, exactly.
Throwaway mentality.
Here we're in a situation where, I mean, as in so many things in life, we have to be careful that we don't choose disordered or evil means to pursue certain ends.
The New York Times, in the New York Times, an NYU bioethicist, Arthur Kaplan, wrote, "This is an ethical choice that Brittany made. She, not her doctors, took her life." Do you believe that?
She, not her doctors, that's true, because she ended up swallowing the pills on her own.
She couldn't have gotten the pills without the doctors.
Exactly.
So
the doctors cooperated in evil. Absolutely. They were cooperators in a fundamental way. And also those who passed the laws in places like Oregon that allow for this, they cooperate in very, very serious evils.
But it's very interesting the way people are reframing this. And Dr. Kaplan and others have said this is changing the optics of this debate.
Well, in some respects, as we said at the opener, among a younger crowd, I think it is. I don't think overall it is. As people reflect on this, they really don't feel that this was a good thing. There's a lot of pushback that one is registering as people reflect on it. This was a young, vibrant woman. When you're younger and you have a terminal illness, you have more resources to mount a battle, to continue. And so there's really something very, very tragic here. And I think people are becoming honest about this and saying this wasn't a good thing in the final analysis.
Is really the big, I mean, I guess the big issue here was really a young person facing death and making this choice. And aside from that, there's really little new here.
Right, because I mean in Oregon, if you look at the statistics, it has been older people who have typically availed themselves of this law. Right. So Brittany was, I think, one of only 4 or 5, maybe 6 people maximum who had done this.
You had a chaplain at Pacific University who wrote a piece, and he said this was a moral choice. So you have religious leaders and chaplains and clergy from other denominations, obviously, getting involved and saying, there's no problem here. It's moral to spare people suffering.
Well, the suffering piece plays big, but I mean, Raymond, I think the question here really is, how do we responsibly approach suffering as humans when it comes to us? Simple example, you're a kid, 10 years old, and you see your doctor coming at you to give you a vaccination with a needle. Now, you can react to the suffering that you know is coming with tremendous fear, maybe hysteria, go crazy. But if your mom and dad say to you, no, look, if you take that needle and don't get all worked up, it's going to be for the good of your future health. You can, in a sense, redirect your focus to greater goods that lie beyond that needle. Same thing with Brittany. She had suffering that was put in front of her. She allowed the fear to recast her whole direction and tragically led her in a direction than to do something that was really harmful.
She was involved with this advocacy group, Compassion and Choices.
The former Hemlock Society.
Oh, is that what it was?
Yes,
the
former Hemlock Society.
Very interesting. Do you have a problem with the politicization of this woman's case? And I mean, obviously, she was party to it.
She was party, and I think she even, in a sense, went out to them to try to, you know, avail herself, give her services to them. But I do think it's tragic. I think it was a very well orchestrated, very successful PR campaign, and I think that, you know, when you went to the website of Compassion and Choices, there wasn't, for example, any way to contact Brittany herself and say, Brittany, would you reconsider? Instead, they had on the website, oh, write a little note of support to Brittany. So it was very obviously crafted, manipulative in many ways, and I think it was politicized in a direction that's really unfortunate.
There were a number of people who responded. A woman with cancer posted her own YouTube, terminal cancer, her own YouTube video. I read a seminarian who was similarly ill who said, no, there's a beauty in this. If you spend the time and go through the suffering, there may be gifts for others as well as yourself.
Yes, I think the fact that we die in a context, in a setting, connected to other people, there's a whole process here that's sacred. And there's so many things that can happen that we don't even expect. There can be forgiveness, there can be healing. There may be, for example, family members who haven't spoken to each other for 20 years. Yeah. Somebody's dying, they come bedside, they speak to each other for the first time in 2 decades. That's significant. And if we short-circuit that through physician-assisted suicide, many graces are lost here. A real tragedy, I'm convinced.
It's an important point to raise as we think about, and none of us like to think about it, but perhaps we should, preparing for the end of life. And there's a lot of information out there. One doesn't know quite what to follow. Should you get a proxy? Should you get one of these physician directives? Your thoughts on that?
The best approach here, Raymond, is to have a proxy. This is somebody that you choose, that's close to you, somebody that loves you, somebody that you've spoken with about your wishes.
You give them durable power of attorney?
Yes, they become the individuals who, if you become unconscious, they will talk to the doctors, talk to the nurses, 2 feet on the ground, make some assessments real time that correspond to your needs and to your wishes. very sensible way to go about it. Meanwhile,
not a physician order of life-sustaining treatment or a living will.
No, because those kinds of things, the living wills, the pulsed forms, as they're called, physician orders, these are filled out way ahead of time. Sometimes they're just check boxes that are very, very general, and they may not correspond at all to what actually happens to you later when you find yourself in a life situation, a life-ending situation.
Sure, and you never know. Life moves, it shifts,
moves
it changes,
quickly,
there are new possibilities.
and you don't know what it is that you're going to die from. So to do these things in a kind of predictive way ahead of time is unrealistic.
Before we run out of time, I want to hit some things in the news. We are seeing amazing new technologies. Breast milk being used to extract stem cells. Tell us about this and what's happened.
This is an amazing development. They've actually done this mostly in mice, but they're looking to check it out also in humans. In mice, they can prove that there is a transfer of stem cells from mother to child during lactation, during the transfer of that breast milk, and that these stem cells, they stably become incorporated later into organs of the baby, of the child. And this is very similar to earlier studies that showed that simply growing in utero, there are few stem cells that sneak across the placenta and get inside the child, and vice versa, from the child back to the mother. So we carry pieces of our mother with us as we grow up, and she carries pieces of us, so to speak. So we're connected even in life.
Amazing. There was another story about a Polish man paralyzed who is injected in his spine?
Yes.
Or around the spine? Tell us about this story.
This used cells out of his nose.
Adult stem cells.
Adult stem cells and some other cells that are involved in putting coats onto nerves. And this helped bridge the damage site. He had been stabbed in the spinal cord, became paralyzed, and he was able to actually regain the ability to move his limbs, his lower limbs. So incredible development. This had also been done in Portugal earlier, so it's kind of continuing the same line of work, an exciting development.
Before I let you go, there were some ballot initiatives this week. Pot use was legalized, Oregon, Washington, D.C. We are seeing new reports now about the detrimental effects of pot on the mind. There was a piece in the New York Times. There was an article I know you wrote recently. Tell us about it. What are the studies and the data telling us? Well,
the data are telling us that there is a real risk of addiction. About 9% of those people who experiment with pot will become addicted. So think what this means, Raymond. You legalize it in a state, you expand the availability, and 9% of all the people who then try it new risk of addiction. There's also very good statistics indicating an increased amount of fatal and non-fatal car accidents from people who use pot. And finally, perhaps the most scary one is that there is long-term impairment of learning ability. Students show reduced performance as they go through school if they have used pot. And these kinds of effects have been very well documented, statistically significant. We need to warn people. And actually, it's funny because in Colorado, they have now taken some of the money from making pot legal to educate people about these untoward effects.
Well, I mean, when the New York Times is reporting that the brain is actually different from pot users as opposed to non-smokers, you got to look at this stuff.
Absolutely. Twice. Certain regions shrink. The amygdala is one region. It's a frightening thing. These are permanent changes if one continues to use pot for an extended period.
Father Tad Pacholczyk, thank you for being here.
Great to be with you, Raymond.
Pleasure to see you. For more on Father Tad's work and all of his columns, visit the National Catholic Bioethics Center website at ncbcenter.org.